Welcome to Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy, and we're excited to discuss the NFC East today with you. This is Cameron Selby. He'll be helping me kind of just get through all of this and talk about all the cool things that are going to happen in the NFC East. So, yeah, go ahead and take it away, Cam.
Yeah, so obviously NFC East is one of the more talked about divisions. One because it has to deal with the Dallas Cowboys, who are a polarizing team. You have the Eagles, who were a heavy favorite coming into the year because of their most recent Super Bowl run in 2022. And then the Giants was one of the biggest surprises of the 2022 season. There's a lot of optimism after winning the playoff game. And then Washington, who has kind of had a little bit of been the redheaded stepchild, so to speak, with all this ownership, name change over the last couple of years, but they find themselves in a really good spot going forward now that kind of black cloud is finally.
Yeah. I think the NFC East is always pretty tantalizing because even, you just look at history, every one of these teams has had good teams at some point in history. The Dallas Cowboys in the 90s were pretty dominant. You've got Washington with Theismann and that era. And then you've got Philly with Donovan McNabb, Terrell Owens. So, and then, of course, Eli Manning, you got the helmet catch versus the Patriots, the 18-0 Patriots. They were a 5 seed that year, 6 seed that year, coming out. So, yeah, they've done – every one of these teams has been big in the past, which is kind of fun.
And we always talk about the Cowboys being the team of the 90s. Well, right before their runs, the Giants had their Super Bowl run. They were the first team to beat the Buffalo Bills. The following year was the year where Washington went 14-2 and just dismantled Buffalo. And then Dallas went back-to-back against Buffalo and then won a third one. So they're kind of known as the team. But as the 90s started and the 80s ended, it was really Washington, the Giants.
Right.
And we're not talking about Philly. Philly had one of the most powerful defenses of that time. They were just caught up as, the next man.
The next team.
Like Cincinnati has been with, in the mid-2000s with Andy Dalton, and then 10-6, 11-5, a lot of the years. But you had Baltimore and Pittsburgh you had to get through. And so sometimes they did, but most of the time they couldn't. They had to go on the road throughout the playoffs. They just didn't have that kind of success.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the Washington Commanders. We're going to talk about them, how we're ordering this show and all these things, and we're doing it by draft order and how a team finished. So Washington came in at 4-13 this last year, and they completely redid their front office. Everybody's come and gone. And they brought in all new coaches, it feels like. And we actually expect them to probably do the same thing with the team. They have a whole bunch of salary cap, and they have a ton of opportunity to just do a complete turnover on this team. So it's a really exciting thing, but it can go, really well, or it can be a terrible decision, and they end up number 2 in the draft again.
Of course. They've never been shy about being aggressive in free agency. In the 2000s, we had instances of them just overspending on guys. Albert Hainsworth comes to mind as one of the bigger contract busts in NFL history. But $73.6 million in cap space, most in the NFL, and then their draft capital is just some of the best you can ask for. 2 early second round picks, number 2 overall. If it stands pat as it likely could be, that's 3 impact starters, 2 very pessimistically, because of the deepness of this draft, and they have several needs.
Yeah.
So it's not like, they're hoping that a guy falls. No, best player available early in the draft, and they have all the money in the world to address what they need to in free agency too to get some of these higher prioritized free agents.
Yeah, I think we would expect them to go at number 2 quarterback. Pick your favorite flavor of the week. I think it is.
Right.
I think we both have Jaden Daniels on as the guy that we expect, especially with the Cliff Kingsbury move. He kind of fits the more athletic build. But Drake May is definitely a guy that Cliff could be like, he can make all the throws. But I think it's got to be quarterback. Jacoby Brissett will be leaving most likely in free agency, so you'll get a rookie quarterback and Sam Howell as the backup, which is pretty good backup. I mean, it's a great backup, you know.
Yeah.
So
and Sam Howell, obviously, it remains to be seen if he can be a starting quarterback in this league. But he reminds me a lot of Gardner Minshew, who before Trevor Lawrence, worst roster in football, but he was putting up some great numbers.
Right.
And he was not the reason that they were as bad as they were 2-14. You know, he was keeping them in games a lot of the time and was not with these costly turnovers. And that lone season has, you know, turned him into somewhat of a journeyman because he'll sign these short-term deals. But look at what he did with Indianapolis this year and how, despite losing Anthony Richardson very early in the season when they were about 500, almost led to a playoff game. And if they would have won the final week of the season against Houston, they would have been that team, and maybe they could have been the ones to knock off Cleveland in the way that Houston did. So that's not saying that Sam Howell can follow the same path, but you feel comfortable with, if you don't have to immediately bring in the quarterback and start in week one, you can still be competitive with Sam Howell.
Right.
I mean, he was at one point leading the league in passing, roughly the midpoint of the season. So, you know, I've always liked him as a prospect, but he was just one of those guys that was like a first-round projection that all of his skill guys left his senior year, and he just kind of really had a down year, vaulted him all the way down to the 5th round. They took a chance on him, and he's been serviceable, but he also has struggled taking care of football. And in this kind of league, that's one of the big no-nos. You don't have to put up these gaudy numbers. I mean, we haven't seen these 5,000-yard seasons in a few years, but it's who takes care of the football,
right?
And who can keep on keeping teams in the game even when you're not playing your best football.
So I think, you know, backup quarterbacks are becoming a commodity because there are so many injuries. I think we had a really high amount of quarterback injuries this year, and I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was at least 8 legit first guys on their teams going down. Anthony Richardson, the Joe Burrows. I think that, you know, it's becoming a true commodity to have a guy that can step in, not feel the pressure the same way as maybe some of these other guys do. And yeah, he turned the ball over, but like you said, he had 350 passing yard games. So, you know, he still has the arm and talent to do it. And I think the turnovers come down a little bit with like becoming a vet, age, and things like that too. So
yeah, and when you're a young quarterback, you're just trying to you know, do your best to make a name for yourself. And if you're a guy that's just a guy, well, if you're throwing 300 yards, it's hard to get ignored. So.
Yeah. Well, also you have the pressure to win. 4-13 team had one of the worst defenses ever, literally ever. So that hurts them in that way. So I think that's important to note that, you know, they gave up 30.5 points this year per game, and so you're just playing catch up the whole time you're out in the field. And so,
bottom of the NFL with a minus 14 turnover difference, so it's hard to establish a consistent winning basis when, you know, that's the bulk of your team. Not only is it not taking care of the football, but you can't even create turnovers. You can't, you know, flip the game to where if your offense isn't really humming. Look at what happened in the Super Bowl with Kansas City, how they were just getting stifled.
Right.
No long extended drives. And then there was a muff punt, which not a muff, whatever you want to call it, special teams turnover. First play from the 13-yard line touchdown, and then all of a sudden they did not score the rest of their drives in that game after 2.5 quarters of just nothing. So that's those kinds of things are hugely important. And when you can't create turnovers, and on top of that you're giving up points, it's not a great recipe for success.
Yeah, some momentum. Like, you just got to feel some momentum, and I don't think anybody on that team felt any momentum throughout the whole year.
Yeah, it's just one of those rough things, but, you know, in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of optimism, especially, you know, the other teams. We said at the very start of this where, you know, Dallas 12-5, Philly just went to the Super Bowl, was the preseason favorite. The Giants, you know, 10-win team that knocked off the Vikings on the road, winning a playoff game. So you had 3 different teams in your division, and all of them took a step back.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things where when you're at the bottom, but you're looking up, and everybody else is coming back down to earth a little bit. That's got a lot of reason to get excited about where you're going in the future.
I think we should be excited about their team a little bit too, because I actually really like their receiving core.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry McLaurin, and then John Dotson, Curtis Samuel, if they bring him back. They're all really solid players. They have a deep and young tight end core behind Logan Thomas. So I think Jeff Bates and Holcomb are both really good players. Could be really good players. Mm-hmm. One of them should probably step into a role as a good player. They had some interior offensive line issues, but the outside of their line hasn't been terrible. So that's good too. They just have a lot of things to fix on the defensive side of the ball.
Exactly.
And that's where it starts.
In recent years, their one true strength across the league, like what stands out most about your team, was their defensive line. Mm-hmm. Because they heavily invested. They had 4 first-rounders, but now that's kind of transitioned to where they're kind of back to square one a little bit. At the deadline, they let go of Montez Sweat. Mm-hmm. They traded Chase Young, who they didn't want to extend because they didn't think of his option. So now all you're really left with is Jonathan Allen. Great building block, but he's also one of those positions that doesn't really impact the game as much as an edge rusher would. You have to be a truly, elite tier of defensive tackle to become a disruptor, like an Aaron Donald, Chris Jones. Yeah, he is in that next tier. He is that talented of a defensive lineman, mm-hmm. but he just doesn't, create the impact plays like those guys do.
Yeah. I think for me, interior pass rush is becoming more and more of what teams are looking for. It's kind of started obviously with with this spread offense. Mm-hmm. It started to slowly creep up. But yeah, so getting a guy, sometimes they're almost more important than the edges, and that's something that I don't think we realize. And how you can use a guy in the interior to like Aaron Donald, who's going to get double teamed on every play, of course, but he's pushing into the quarterback's face directly. Like, what's the shortest point? Between 2 points, it's straight, and he's got the straightest impact. Jonathan Allen's been good. I think he could be a possible piece in moving around for them. Is what they were talking about for going up to the first pick, even if they wanted to go get Caleb Williams, who played with Cliff Kingsbury at USC this last year.
And then even if you, not to cut you off, but even if you do go Drake May, you have the double North Carolina quarterback room. Mm-hmm. And that would be a massive benefit for Drake May's development, is having already somebody he's comfortable with.
Right.
And then, that could help him thrive right away, especially when you have a receiving core, like you mentioned, that is very serviceable. It's not the Giants where there's just a bunch of wide receiver 3s and 4s that are, hopefully you get a 40-yard game out of one of them or something like that. There's Jahan Dotson, first rounder. Obviously, he hasn't been a hugely productive receiver yet, but Terry McLaurin has been a consistent 1,000-yard receiver so far in his career, and Curtis Samuel was another guy that's just always been
gadget guy.
Yeah. So and the running back room, it's not something that is I consider strength, but Brian Robinson's been very solid, and then Antonio Gibson, he's always been a good running back with fumbling issues, but he also, for whatever reason, just has not been used right in the last couple of seasons. So there's pieces, and as a rookie, we've seen a lot more quarterbacks have some success. Look at C.J. Stroud this year, who, whether or not you believe he was going to be a success in the NFL, that's besides the point. But with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, young guys, Dalton Schultz coming in, it wasn't like, oh, yeah, he's going to have the greatest quarterback rookie season ever. Mm-hmm. But he had just enough and then just ran with it.
Right.
So this is the kind of situation where you could not expect the same kind of production, but a similar optimism, at least in the early stages of whoever they pick's career.
And if you have to address so much on the defensive side of the ball, you have to think that, you won't expect them to right away, be able to hold people to under 20. So you're still going to have to score points. you're still going to have to allow the rookie, if he starts early. I mean, you might put Sam Howell in there if you think like, hey, but we're going to take a second. But if he does start early, he's going to have to put points up. That's something that Jaden Daniels did a lot at LSU, and his defense at LSU was also pretty rough. So he kind of understands that role. He threw 40 touchdowns, like 4 interceptions. That's the type of thing that you have to look at when you're picking a guy too. Is like, okay, well, Sam Howell just threw 30 interceptions this year, I think, right? 25 to 30, right?
It wasn't that high.
It wasn't that high. Okay.
He led the league in interceptions.
Okay, well, the most interceptions in the league. You get a guy like Jaden Daniels who doesn't turn the ball over and knows how to play at that high pace, high level of offense. Right. Would be something that you can make cases for both guys. Basically, is what I'm getting at. So,
and this is also a league of parity. So it's not like the worst teams get the best draft picks. Normally, they have the most draft capital and a lot of the free agency money. Very seldom are you going to see somebody that's just like they suck. They don't have their first round pick. They have no cap space, i.e. Carolina. So very rarely is that a case, but there's a lot of room for improvement. And you look at Detroit as an example, who they weren't at the very bottom of the draft in the last couple of years. However, they couldn't stop a cold on defense on the run or the pass. Right. And all of a sudden now they're one of the better defenses. With a lot of somewhat no names, they don't have other than Nathan Hutchinson, who's really, came into his own and exceeded at least my expectations, at least early on. But they don't really have a lot of guys who are just like, oh yeah, he's going to be a multi-time Pro Bowler. They don't have that. But all of a sudden, they're formidable, and all they got to do is just solve that back end. Right. Washington, same thing. Like, they just kind of stripped it down to the very start. They're starting over. It's just not working. And they're just going to reinvest. And who knows how quickly it can turn around, but they have the assets to do so. Right. And it's investment, too, in, like you said earlier, they invested a lot of money, or a lot of picks in their D-line. This is going to be more cap space and money this year rather than that because of the fact that they just don't have the time. But I think that, over time they could definitely improve, especially, getting a rookie quarterback in the next year, and then it just builds off that. But yeah, so we're going to move on to the New York Giants. They, this year, were 6-11, probably disappointing to most Giants fans. I don't know that we were that surprised that the Giants did poorly, but I think that, most Giants fans are expecting another, 10-17, hopefully, playoff hopeful. Yeah, like I said previously, there was a lot of optimism because they did overachieve, and even if you were the most optimistic about them going into 2022, they still exceeded that by about 2 to 3 wins. Right. Yeah. So, and no one expected them to be one of the Final Four in the conference. All that stuff, coupled with the fact that they're with Daniel Jones, who, has been fine, but he hasn't been anything to spend $40 million a year on, which is what they did. Right. And there was a lot of, kind of awkwardness early in the season with Saquon Barkley, who was just like, I'm not coming back. How would y'all invest in him? Where y'all are projecting, whereas I've, kind of proven myself outside of the injuries that I've had. And, all of that was just kind of some weird energy in the room. Yeah, but it's also the running back world. We have to, that's one thing that running backs are they want to get paid. And the problem is, a lot of times we can find running backs to do a similar job. Not a Saquon-esque job or a Christian McCaffrey-esque job, but we can find guys that are serviceable and we can go pay other positions to make our team better. The Chiefs winning back-to-back Super Bowls, the 7th-round rookie, Isaiah Pacheco, as their starting running back, is the worst thing that could happen for that position. Right. Especially, obviously, there's outliers like Christian McCaffrey who can be the highest paid, but he's so versatile that it doesn't matter because he's a scat back that doesn't need to carry the ball in between the tackles 25 times every game because he can just have 14 carries, but then 7 receptions. Yeah. Like in the Super Bowl, 80 receiving yards, 80 rushing yards. And he would have been the Super Bowl MVP had they won the game. So, but that's the exception. Yeah. For the most part, you look at Austin Eckler, who was kind of one of the advocates of being paid, and then he just had one of the worst seasons he could have had. And now he's a free agent,
right?
And he's an older free agent, and he's kind of probably going to be the short end of the stick with all the other running backs like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, all free agents in their primes outside of Henry. But yeah, it's that's kind of the nature of the business with that position. But with Saquon, it's not just investing in him versus investing in the other guy. It was the awkwardness, and it didn't seem like the vibes were right from the get-go. And they had a absolutely brutal stretch for the first 2 months of their season. And one of my, I guess, better predictions or calls was they were going to struggle. You know, I thought it would be about 2-7, and that's exactly what happened. And it's not that they just sucked. They couldn't get anything going. They were just getting blown up.
Well,
First few weeks, yes.
Yeah.
But they were very competitive in losing close games. And then it didn't help that, you know, Daniel Jones had an injury, came back, and then immediately was lost for the year.
Yeah.
So, but even if he did get or stay healthy the entire season, I'm not sure how much of a difference he would have made in terms of the record of how they finished the year.
Right. Well, I think also you did say, you know, they didn't suck. They did get blown out by Dallas 40-0 on Monday Night Football. Everybody was watching.
Yes.
But they also, like you said, have wide receivers 3s and 4s. Their number one wide receiver coming into the year was Darren Waller. Wasn't, you know, some other guy. Wasn't Jalen Hyatt, who we thought might. Maybe we didn't think this, but a lot of people thought he would take the step up and be the guy.
Just because there was opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, it's a bunch of wide receiver 3s and 4s that there's just room for somebody to take 120 targets.
Yeah.
And it's just like, let's pick that guy.
Yeah.
He was drafted high.
So Darren Waller was their number one. He gets injured. And it's like, what do we do? Like, it was almost that kind of thing. Like, it felt like they just had no answers, nowhere to go with the ball. Like, every defense, you know, they were held under 200 yards in like 3 out of 5. Like, those types of things are like not. You can't make any momentum. Like, you'll be like, well, we went 2-7, but we played well. No, it wasn't that at all. Like, we went 2-7, and we can't even move the ball. We have nothing. I think also another thing is, I looked. So last night when I was looking at stuff, their offensive line has one guy, and Andrew Thomas, who graded out by PFF in like the 70s, mid to high 70s. Everybody else was in either the low 40s or high 30s, or probably high 30s.
Yeah, they giving up 85 sacks is the most in 30 years by any line, and it wasn't close. They were 20 sacks higher than the next worst team.
Yeah.
It was that big of a gap of how horrible their line played. And we thought that the Jets line was rough.
Yeah.
No. Like, it was way worse. And it didn't help that, you know, Evan Neal was hurt and Andrew Thomas was banged up. But even if they were healthy, that wasn't going to solve all their issues. They have basically every single position other than Andrew Thomas needs to be addressed. And Evan Neal, I know he's an early pick, but he still hasn't shown anything that was the draft investment that they had a few seasons ago.
Number 7. Yeah. So, I mean, actually, you know, they've missed 3 years in a row today. Deonte Banks, who was a rookie, but he was not playing well this year. Then you have Evan Neal and you have Kayvon Thibodeau in the same class. They were 5 and 7, I believe. And Evan Neal, most likely, to me personally, my personal thoughts is, you know, right tackle needs to be addressed, and I think it needs to be addressed now. I don't know that you can keep a guy who is going to give up and not be able to. Well, first, you know, injury hurts. Of course, that doesn't help anything. But he wasn't playing well prior. Yeah. It wasn't like he was playing. He wasn't playing
having a Pro Bowl season and then just went down. No,
right. He was playing poorly and then went down and then came back and was worse. So my biggest thing for him is, you know, maybe it's hard to say because I've seen a lot of people, Daniel Jeremiah, the NFL Network guys, they've mocked Fuaga to the Giants at 6. Now, I don't think that's the right place. That's way too early. They put him over Joe Alt, things like that. But I do think, you know, possibly moving back from 6, adding some draft capital and getting a guy like Amarius Mims or Tyler Guyton could be something that would be in the cards, I guess, is my best way of putting it. Because I think Evan Neal will be a guard when it's all said and done, which is probably right. He doesn't have to pass protect as much, and he gets to use his physicality in the run game, which he wasn't bad at. He's not terrible at the run game. He just trying to block, and do the dance on an island out there. It's difficult. And this is a league where we always thought, this was a league where you just needed a left tackle and you could pass protect and you could use your right tackle to run block. But nowadays, you need both tackles. You need both to do that.
Yeah, and I understand that to an extent, but because of the fact that they do have 2 early second round picks, I'm not necessarily saying that it's the best, idea for them to trade down.
Right.
Obviously, if somebody gives an offer, whoever is in a position that has multiple needs, if you get an offer, you can't refuse. Take that off. But they're kind of in a prime position to kind of correct the skill issue that we've seen. And obviously, Saquon's a free agent. I don't think there's any chance that they keep him. I feel like there's just way too many needs. And after investing in Daniel Jones, I think they're going to try to upgrade and put pieces around him that will benefit him more so than Saquon. And so if you leave Saquon and then you have another year on an injury-prone Darren Waller, you absolutely have nobody. And how can you expect Daniel Jones to succeed when he doesn't have anything? And you're in the prime position. I know some people have the Chargers taking a skill guy. That's not what they need. They're in the prime position to take their next receiver off the board. And Malik Neighbors and Roma Dunze are far and away the best options compared to, after them is a significant drop-off, at least at the wide receiver position. And I don't think that tight end is going to
show up there,
solve a lot of stuff for them. So I say that to say, I know that they do need to address their line as much as they should, but there's a lot more depth in the interior line, and there's going to be some tackle that drops just based on after that run in the 20s of the first round. There's going to be a guy or two that just kind of fall, and they're right in position to snag them up or trade up a little bit to get them right there
in the first round.
And if you flip it, and like you said, let's say they trade down to Minnesota, and 11 they take the best available tackle, which will at that point likely be the third best guy.
Right.
Hopefully he works out. But then you look in the second round, and that's going to be around the range where these the third tier of receivers is, and you got to compare this receiver and this tackle versus this receiver.
And that's my question. But with this idea, the third tackle on the board to me is Fuller. So, they're mocking him to be there at 6, take him at 6. Well, if you move down to 11 and you get him at 11, you did the same thing. And of course, this is us, picking hairs. Truly, Malik Neighbors versus if Joe Alt's there, you're taking Joe Alt, right? I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah,
to me.
I would
because Joe Alt is the number 1 tackle, and he's a bona fide number 1 to me. I don't think that a lot of people are trying to piece between Olu and Joe, and it's not really there to me. Because I think Joe is just so much more dominant as a power guy. He's good in the run game, and he's good in pass blocking. While Olu is probably the better pass blocker, but his run and his power lack a lot more to me. So that's kind of the question. So if Joe Alt's there, I think you do take Joe Alt, and you just say, okay, we're going to move him to right tackle, and we're going to put Evan Neal at guard, and we just addressed 2 positions. I don't know that they're going to move off of John Michael Schmidt Jr. yet, the center, because he's a second-round pick from last year, and then you just address guard, and you have a full O-line, fully revamped O-line, kind of. And so that's my thing. But yes, I do agree that Malik Neighbors is, the explosive guy, but I don't know which guy fits better to me. And also, of course, you're not going to pick on fit. You're going to pick on who's the better player at the end of the day for the Giants. But I do believe that Rome Odunze fits better because he runs good routes. He's a contested catch guy. Well, they have a speedster in Jalen Hyatt who they just picked. Darius Slayton's a speedster. He ran low 4.3s. So, and I think that Romadunze might run those types of numbers. He's just going to also be the guy you throw the ball to down the field and just expect him to make a play. Yeah. He's 6'3", 210.
Yeah, I've seen, and one thing I want to preface: when I compare players, I don't say this is going to be their ceiling. I say this is the style in which they play, and I've seen a lot of guys that compare him to Larry Fitzgerald in the way that he is versatile, to where he can be that go up and get it guy, but he's going to be a hell of a route runner as well.
Yeah.
So, like you said, that is a lot more what they do need, and a lot of people do actually have Adonze over Malik Neighbors for that very reason. So, whereas Malik Neighbors is just kind of like he's going to take the top off the defense, but if you already have two of those guys, why do you need a third guy like that? This isn't a Miami style of offense where you're just going to have a lot of gadget, misdirection going around your offense. Like it's going to be a drop back and throw offense, at least for the time being with Daniel Jones.
Right. So. But so you get they're just two completely different players, and with this, when you draft, you kind of need to pick based on what you really need. Like you're not going to take a natural left tackle and say, go play right, unless you know he can do it, like Joe Alt, we think. But I wouldn't take Olu and say, go play right tackle, because that's not really, I don't think he will adjust as well. So I think that's something, definitely needs to, when we get to the draft time, we'll know a little bit more too, with free agency and what's going to happen. They might decide to sign a receiver. Not necessarily a number one, but someone that's serviceable to be a number one. If Darren Waller is playing and you have other guys around. But they have to address their line too.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And obviously another kind of issue to address as well is their secondary, because they kind of fell off towards the end of the year despite, playing better, but they were giving up a lot more. But two of their two best corner and safety in Adoree Jackson and Xavier McKinney, both true free agents, unrestricted free agents, and no matter what, you can only keep one. And if it was my personal preference, I would say Xavier McKinney because of his age and being on a bad team, being the number one safety in coverage, setting career highs in tackles, turnovers, all that stuff. He's one of those guys that is just a great football player, and you need those when you just don't really have a ton of those on your team.
Yeah. Sometimes the positional value doesn't matter as much when you get a guy that just can do everything.
Exactly. So you look at guys like Tyrann Mathieu, who doesn't really check a lot of boxes as being a true corner or a true safety, but he's just a football player, and he does it all. And he was a big impact on Kansas City's first Super Bowl with being kind of a roamer, so to speak, but he was always near the football and he was always making plays. And for some reason, just he hasn't been able to latch onto a team for the long term.
Right.
In his career, started at Arizona, went to Houston for a season, Kansas City for a couple of years, then he went to New Orleans. But it's true that all teams need guys like that. That you don't have to be, this is your position, this is what you do, and stay true to that. You just need guys that play good ball.
Yeah.
And he's one of those guys.
All pro caliber football players.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Yes. That's how I look at it. Not going to wow you at one thing, but maybe, grade out right above average at everything, right?
Exactly.
And so you can use them in their gadget, chess players. So, but yeah, so I think we did a pretty good job on the Giants. Let's move over to Philly. All right. So, Philly this year, they did great coming into the year, first few games, They looked awesome. We talked about them at one point. And of course, the NFL's ever changing, but when they beat the Chiefs, we kind of had this conversation about, I just asked everybody, I was like, who's your team? Like, who are you scared to play? Who's the team to beat in the NFC? And some people said San Francisco, which I think you did. And some people said Philly, including myself, because they just beat the Chiefs. They were, playing really well. It wasn't like they were playing great. They had, one loss on the year, I believe, or two losses on the year. So they were at a point where you were like, okay, they have an opportunity to go back. And then the wheels just fell off.
Yeah, it was one of the craziest collapses I've ever seen from an elite team.
Yep.
And, we've seen some where, teams start out hot, miss the playoffs, and it's just like, what happened? But this team went to the Super Bowl last year. And controversy or not, holding call decided the Super Bowl, you were right there at the very end. And then you got better this offseason. And then at the trade deadline with Kevin Byard, all-pro safety that came to kind of help solve the need, upgraded at running back. I think DeAndre Swift, we can all agree, was a better fit than Miles Sanders was. And just like you said, the wheels fell off. It was weird. It was a weird vibe, but just it's kind of like where do you go from here?
Right.
How do you fix what just happened? And the biggest thing that I saw at the very end was just the lack of energy, the lack of want, especially against Tampa. They came out so the flattest I've ever seen a 11, 12, 13 win team do in the playoffs, which obviously they were favored against Tampa, but I actually picked Tampa going to the game because I'm just like, you played your starters against the Giants the week before because there was a chance that you could somehow win the division if Washington upset Dallas, and you just got rocked from start to where they pulled the starters. And obviously, A.J. Brown got hurt. Jalen Hurts got hurt a little bit as well, but that wasn't an indicator of how that game was going to go.
For me, I look for veterans in that time. And normally, okay, you see a team kind of roll down the hill. It's like, okay, they don't have like strong voices in the locker room. This team has the strongest voices in the locker room. Like from top to bottom, like Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, both guys that are going to go into free agency and possibly be gone next year. And there's a little bit of turning, handing over the keys. But those two,
Kelsey, arguably one of the greatest centers we've ever seen in this game.
Yeah, both of their corners, Darius Slay and Bradbury, have been in big games, played really well. So I'm just very surprised by that. There was no voice. And it just felt like, it almost felt like they were bickering. It's like that was the vibe I got, is like they were bickering with each other rather than, there wasn't any camaraderie. There wasn't any excitement, like you were saying. Like I didn't see anybody come to the sideline and be like, hey, we need to get this together. We need to figure our shit out. Because that was not what was happening.
And this wasn't, I'll throw it back, since I guess I'd say I'm a Cowboys fan. 2008, year after the Cowboys go 13-3, 12 Pro Bowlers on their team. And, T.O. is a big polarizing guy, one of the best receivers in football at the time. And they were 9-3 going into December, lost 4 straight. Ended the year losing to Philly 45-30. Just insane how poorly that season ended. But that was a huge divide of, your T.O. side, your Tony and Witten side. Like, the locker room was absolutely divided one way or the other. And there was a lot of awkwardness despite them being good throughout the year. So it wasn't just like, they were a great team and everything was figured out. There was great voices. They didn't have a lot of great voices in that locker room at the time, but they were a talented football team that just kind of collapsed. Philly has all the voices, and it just to me, I would argue even worse, just based on the results of the previous season, expectations going into 2023.
I think they were, top. They had to have been top 2, top 3 favored to win the Super Bowl. I don't know what it was.
They were the number one favorite.
Number one, absolutely. So that. It was just wild to watch because it started, probably 3 weeks before the playoffs, where we were like, something weird's happening, whatever, they'll figure it out. They just didn't. They didn't figure it out. And so it's going to take the offseason, I guess, to figure it out.
And this year, they're losing a lot more, or they could lose a lot more than they did last year. Last year was more of a running back, but you still picked up Jalen Carter in the draft, and like I said, there was a couple pieces that you upgraded. You didn't. It wasn't a lateral move; they were upgrades, and so you were expected to. It didn't break. It doesn't have to be. Oh, you won 14 games last year. You got to win 15 this year. But to sustain success, and the NFC was very depleted this year. It was really the whole season. It was a 3-team race between Philly, Dallas, and San Fran, and obviously Detroit came on at the end. But it was more so at the expense of Dallas and Philly collapsing, more so than it was Detroit just catching fire and bringing it over the top.
Mm-hmm.
So it's weird. There's not a lot of, teams that I would say go into next year other than San Fran and Detroit that are really the teams to beat in the NFC. I wouldn't even include Dallas right now.
Yeah.
But Philly is still one of those teams to me.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Jalen Hurts had a very down year, but you would expect that he would still come back with the weapons that he has and be formidable at least.
Yeah,
so
I don't understand how they couldn't win. I don't know how they couldn't win 9 games. And so that puts them in playoff contention right off the bat, just by talent alone.
Exactly.
But at the same time, and so we're talking about this, in February, before, next year happens. Like, a lot of things are going to change, of course. But, like, just speculating, like, maybe it's the coaches. Maybe it's, other things, not the players.
And I've seen a lot of weird things where, Nick Sirianni just led Philly to Super Bowl. Yeah, there was a lot of rumors that, like, Bill Belichick's going to take his job. And I'm actually surprised that they kept him. And you don't really hear that from a team that just won the Super Bowl. But, he doesn't call plays. He gave up play calling duties. He's not offensive or defensively, like, has a lot of influence. Right. And he lost both coordinators the previous year or in the offseason. And maybe that was the big change that kind of resulted in this. But still, you were 10-1.
Mm-hmm.
And, went through multiple defensive coordinators. And then now Kellen Moore's coming. And I don't know stylistically if that's the best fit. But I don't think that Nick Sirianni is really going to have a lot of influence. And he's just kind of more of the rah-rah guy, which you can still have rah-rah guys. I would consider Dan Campbell a rah-rah guy because he doesn't really specialize in defensive adjustments, calling plays, or offensive calling plays. But he's the energy guy. He makes sure that both sides of the ball are how they're supposed to be. And Nick Sirianni, I don't really get that vibe from him.
He makes decisions, too. Dan Campbell makes the decision. I mean, we've seen the decisions.
Yes.
4th down every time we go. But Nick Sirianni, I don't know that he's making those decisions. I think he's probably leaving it up to others. And he's getting paid $35 million. Mm-hmm. His contract that he is $35 million. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, let's reassess what we need to do, because he was floating on the coattails of others possibly, and we need to make sure that he's doing all of what he needs to be doing to make this team the best it can be. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and I think there's a lot of pressure on him, more so than anybody going into the season, because hypothetically, say they start out middling and they're 2-3, 2-4 to start the year, and all of a sudden it's just like panic mode with the roster that they have. They could easily let him go and then just find somebody else to come in and look at what the Raiders have gone through, and how it seems like every time a coach gets fired,
we play better. Oh, absolutely, we do. I know.
And look, the talent that Philly has, just imagine that scenario where midway through the season they're 500 or just below, and they need to spark. And it's not like they have the assets that are at that time, because obviously they have $20 million in cap space now. They won't have that in the regular season, and they'll either have the veterans that they might lose or they won't. Mm-hmm. But regardless, you're not really going to add anybody that's just going to instantly turn their team around on a dime.
Right.
So I could very well see them letting him go, and then all of a sudden the spark is like, all right, fire's lit up under everybody's asses. Let's go.
Yeah.
We're talented. We're too talented to let this be a thing. Or it could just go straight into chaos.
Yeah. I think, well, it'll be very interesting what they do with, of course, Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, and then what they do at corner. Mm-hmm. If they decide that, they need to move on from one of the aging corners. I mean, Gary Slay's taking an $11 million hit on the cap.
Which he was one of the few bright spots.
Yeah.
Like, despite the secondary playing as poorly as it was at the start of the year, they actually got better once. Once Matt Patricia came in and took over the defensive coordinator, they played much better, at least in the secondary. They were more so middle in the pack, but they were next to Washington, the worst in football the first half of the season, despite being 10-1. And he was one of the few bright spots, James Bradbury was more so the one that was picked on and struggled. So, and then you got Bradley Roby, their nickel that is free agent.
Yeah, Avonte Maddox is making. But this is actually what I was going to say about the cap is Avonte Maddox is making $9 million hit next year, and then Bradbury's making a $4 million hit. So it's like, okay, if we really look at it, it's like, okay, Avonte Maddox is probably not the guy that needs to be taking the $9 million hit. So could we move him around and find that cap space to get it, a number one in, and stuff like that. So I think that would be a guy that could be moved in and out. So we're going to jump over to the Dallas Cowboys to finish it out, the NFC East champions, and they will be our last team on this. Dallas has some issues with injuries every year, I feel like. They have a running back room that needs to be addressed. But at the same time, they had a lot of bright spots this year. CeeDee Lamb he's a bright spot every year, I feel like. He just gets better and better. Still mad at the Raiders for taking Henry Ruggs over him. But that's okay. So I think that's obviously something. But they do have some pretty big cap hits. Dak's making $59 million this year. He's the second highest paid player in football behind Deshaun Watson. So I think that's going to have to be talked about at least. But yeah.
Yeah, and the only thing I can sum up to put in totality of this year is missed opportunity. We can talk about, it's been 26 years since they've been back to won a Super Bowl, let alone be back to an NFC Championship game. But the problem is that there was such a clear path to at least, at minimum, go to the NFC Championship game, and they absolutely blew it. And it wasn't a last-second field goal, what are you going to do kind of moment against a young playoff team where they just kind of took them for granted. No, they got absolutely embarrassed. And I think there's a lot of finger pointing that went on in the aftermath of that. Whereas like family members of the star players are Tad Prescott saying that my brother doesn't need to be here. Like that energy is already starting, and we haven't even gotten into, or we hadn't even finished the season. And it was just, it's hard to see where to go from here. After, they had their third straight 12-win season. A lot of good to take away, like you said. Great, very solid defense. Their line got back to being a top 5 line. All pros all around. Most of all pros in football was by the Dallas Cowboys this year. You had Dak Prescott have a career year, lead the league in touchdowns, and there was just a lot of positives. And that was all despite Trayvon Diggs, who is their second best defensive player, getting lost for the year in game 3. I'm sorry. So all of that to say, they should be going into the offseason feeling like, oh, we're the team to beat, but it just doesn't feel that way right now.
Right. I think also they have some guys, that are going to have to be paid. Tyron Smith is just right there as the guy you have to figure out how to get back probably. And I know he's had injury history, but last year he was the 26th highest paid offensive tackle in the league. And I just don't think that's reasonable. But he is getting older, so you might be able to find a way to get maybe a 2-year contract for him or something like that.
I think that's what's needed. And you look at the cap number, they got negative $19 million. There's 10 teams right now with negative cap space, but that's before contract restructures, extensions, releases, like you said with Avonte Maddox, that are going to open up that. And in reality, they could probably have about $25 million to spend, especially after Dak's cap hit, like you said, $59 million. If they extend him, which I'm sure that they will, whether that's a good move or bad move, we can talk about that another day. But that is going to bring his cap to it, cut it in like 3. And all of a sudden, Zach Martin, maybe they want to extend him because his is the second highest cap hit, and that's going to cut in half. And then Marcus Lawrence has a high cap hit, over $20 million. Same thing. And all of a sudden, that's million to add, and then you can start talking about if you want to re-sign Tyron Smith, which I think they should, despite all the injuries. He is still the top 3 tackle in football, and he was an All-Pro this year, one of the highest graded players in the entire sport on PFF.
When he plays, he's amazing.
Yeah, Stephon Gilmore, very serviceable, and I know he was beat up a bunch in the playoffs, and people want to look at the play against Romeo Doubs where he just kind of guesses wrong and just wide open. But if he's your third best corner, I feel very good about my secondary. And Deron Bland, I don't think he will. I feel like he kind of played above what he will be, but he was a Pro Bowler, and Trayvon Diggs is an All-Pro. And you have just a lot of pieces that if you are expecting a guy to be your third best player, then it feels a lot better than if you're like, oh, he's your only guy. So you look at Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks isn't I would feel bad if that was my wide receiver 1. I wouldn't feel great about my offense, but when he's your third option or second option, he brings it to the top offense. And that's what he's done his whole career as a journeyman. So, there's a lot of ways, and they have a lot of role players that are expiring contracts this year that they need to figure out what they're going to do. And there's not a lot of players, other than contract restructures, there's not a lot of players that can just be cut and that's going to open up spots. I think one that comes to mind is they extended Michael Gallup the same offseason that they traded Cooper because he's too expensive. Awful decision in hindsight. But they extended Michael Gallup for more than half that. And if they cut him this offseason, they will actually lose money against the cap. So you're stuck with him.
Right.
And it's not like you can restructure because he still has 3 years. So it's
like Terrence Steele is the same way, I believe.
Yeah, Terrence Steele, they extended. One of our good friends hates his guts, and every time that there's a bad play that's made, he's just like, yeah, there goes Steele again.
But I don't completely disagree with him.
Yeah.
After watching him play at more of an analyst and watching it a different way than I had prior.
What I would say about Terrence Steele is he's the epitome of why you don't re-sign every single one of your draft picks. Because Dallas has actually been very, very good in the draft of the last decade. They've had a lot of hits, way more hits than they have missed, especially in the early parts of the draft. I mean, you can point out Taco Charlton, you can point out, we'll see if Monty Smith, he was not the right pick for them. But for all of those, there's 3 other ones that hit.
Right.
And the problem is when you hit on multiple players in the draft, they all come up at the same time. So Trayvon Diggs, Michael Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, all have to be extended in the same offseason.
Right. Absolutely.
And that comes after Terrence Steele, who was a late round pick, has panned out, but they signed him to a very lucrative deal that I'm not sure that would benefit them in the long run. Even though, if they let him walk, they would have gotten worse. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think that his contract helped them because of all the people that hit even more that are their stars that they need to extend. So, that's just kind of where I see this team at. They're kind of in a purgatory of they're probably going to be favored or co-favorites to win the NFC. They're probably going to be the third, fourth best odds in the NFC to win the Super Bowl. Where have we heard this story before? Every single year in the last few years, and to me, it just kind of comes down to like that regular season doesn't even matter because they should be in the playoffs, whether they win the division or not. It's are you going to get past Denver? Are you going to get past Green Bay? Like, and that's nothing to take away from Green Bay, but Green Bay was not nearly as talented as Dallas.
No,
and it was a 4-touchdown game late in that game.
I watched a lot of things about talking about how Green Bay is, the next team, and that Jordan Love should be one of your top 3 quarterbacks under 25, and I'm like, I don't see that at all. But that's not. He played 2 really good games.
Exactly.
At the end of the year. Maybe he's more clutch than other players, but he is not, to me, a top 3 guy. That doesn't even come close to me. So I think with Dallas, they put the money in the right places. That's the cool part about them is that you look at their cap hits and it's like, oh well, that's an All Pro, and Dak, the All Pro, and then you got Zach Martin, he's an All Pro, and then you got D-Law, who has played amazing in the run game.
He just doesn't put in the stats. So if you go to the box score, you're gonna be like, oh, you're paying somebody $20 million and he's only got 8 stats.
But he's doing all the other things.
Exactly. And being your complement to your star pass rusher,
right,
it brings out his impact even more. It's one thing if you're. I kind of compare him a little bit to Joey Bosa, who very good all around player. But if he's the only guy that they got on the edge, it's just like, wow, this is the guy that has the highest cap hit of any edge rusher. Really? That's who you're riding with? And then all of a sudden, that's like Joey Bosa might get moved.
Right.
And I don't think he should or deserves to be, but that's just kind of the difference of if you're the second guy versus the first guy. And Dallas has so much talent.
I think, like, when I'm thinking about, like, how well a team is really doing, right? When you have to address the important positions, is like, okay, those teams need, more time, basically. Dallas, you look at their team and you're like, you need to address running back. You need to address center because he's a free agent this year.
Yeah, Tyler Beat.
And if he's really good, I really like watching him play.
At the same time, the demeanor of you can't re-sign him.
Right.
And so, like Connor Williams, very good offensive lineman, and they let walk, and he has been very good for Miami when he's been healthy. You can't re-sign everybody.
Yeah.
You just can't. And Kansas City is kind of the show of, like, you don't have to have just be top heavy and have the best receiver, best tight end, best quarterback, and you're going to win a Super Bowl. And they used all the picks that they got from Tyreek Hill. They maximized it, and then they got Trent McDuffie, and then all these guys, and then all of a sudden they're back-to-back champs. So they kind of show the way of, like, you don't have to have the most talent at every position.
Right.
So you just need a great overall team. And Dallas has a lot of those guys, but kind of on the opposite end of Philly, where we say that they have a bunch of vets and voices. Dallas doesn't really have any vets that have been there. Obviously, Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, D-Law are great vets to have, but they haven't been there. So they've sorely lacked bringing somebody in that can take them over the top, and they have had a lack of aggression at the trade deadline the last couple of seasons, where they were one of the best teams, but San Fran 2 straight years, Christian McCaffrey trade, Chase Young trade, and trying to improve their team despite already being the most talented team. Philly, the last few years, has made aggressive moves at the deadline to improve their roster. Dallas just kind of stands pat. And a lot of times when you stand pat, it's kind of hard to just expect that you're just going to, if you haven't been there,
get over the hump.
Yeah, with your own guys.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't like basketball where, the Spurs can bring back everybody after a devastating loss and then just have an incredible season because of the chemistry. Like, football is a lot of moving parts. That's why teams can go up and down and be 11-6 one year and 5-12 the next year, because if your quarterback goes down, you're screwed. Cincinnati's the Super Bowl runner-up, and then all of a sudden they just struggled this year because
missed the playoffs. They did play in one of the best divisions in football, too,
of course.
Which makes it even worse.
Just in totality, there's so many moving parts that you can't just expect, like, oh, we'll be back, because we were told last year after Dallas lost a close one to San Fran, like, oh yeah, we lost a close game to a favorite on the road, but we'll be back. And they did exactly that, and they set it up perfectly. They made a run in addition to Philly kind of collapsing to where they got the 2 seed. All they had to do was just win home games where they were undefeated all season, 9-0, and then see if you could knock off San Fran. And who, after the fact, they were not playing their best football to end the year. And so they were down at home against teams that they should have been controlling the entire game.
Yeah.
And so who knows what would have happened. But what I can say is that they did underachieve based on how that they performed. And that's just something that just can't be tolerated, especially if you're trying to get over the hump.
Right. They're the first 2 seed to lose
Since the playoffs.
Yeah. So,
and it wasn't close. I have to emphasize that. Yeah, it was to a wouldn't say much worse, but
not
a less talented team.
Yeah.
And it was not close from the start. And I actually went to that game, and the frustration that it's not even just being a Cowboy fan; it's just a football fan.
Yeah.
Just how can you, after the way you ended the season, show up like this?
Expectation wise,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
So, everything that they do this offseason, they can improve or say that they're going to improve all they want, but there's a track record of just saying that you're going to do it and not actually doing it. And then it's hard to give any kind of expectations because of that.
Well, yeah, we want to see it, and how are you going to do it? Because at the same time, they have good players. No, like that's something we should, emphasize also. It's like they have great players.
Yeah.
But they have to be able to find a way to just, win at the end of the year against teams that are hungry. That's what Green Bay was. They're a young team that talked themselves into being able to play, and Dallas didn't stop that. Because like when we always play football, like you always talk about, we need to remind them that they should not be on the field with us at times because we're the better team. We need to make sure they know we're the better team. Right. And that's something Dallas just couldn't do in that game.
I feel like they're afraid of going all in because they're trying to stay at least competitive enough to be, a weekly talking point. Because Dallas, it doesn't matter how good you are. If they're serviceable, they're going to be on every talk show every single week. They're going to be the number one game of the week on Fox, especially when they play Philly or any marquee team. They'd rather stay in that limelight than go all in, rob Peter to pay Paul, struggle a couple years down the road, but get over the hump. And you look at the Rams, for example, how they just somehow, some way, found a way to afford guys, went all in, pushed all their chips in the table, traded for Stafford, got all these guys, and it's just like, how do they have this money? And on top of that, they were still paying Todd Gurley, who wasn't even on the team, and won the Super Bowl. And then a lot of those guys left, and then we thought, they're going to be one of the worst teams in football this season, or just really struggle
after last season.
Yeah, and they made the playoffs, and all of a sudden they're starting to develop a young core because they just put all in. But then their later round picks, they didn't have a first round pick. This is one of the craziest stats. They didn't have a first round pick from when they selected Jared Goff. This year is their first round pick since then in 8 years. 8 seasons of not having a first round pick, and they still won a Super Bowl because they just continue to be like, I don't want to develop this fourth best corner. I want to go trade for Brandon Cooks, or I want to, get Jalen Ramsey, or all this, or Matthew Stafford because Jared Goff isn't getting us over the hump. Making those moves got them over the hump. Dallas is like, I don't want to be 5-12 in 2027. So I'm gonna just stand pat where I'm at, be good to win 10 games, early playoff exit, but we made our money.
5-12 to Super Bowl winning team, though. But of course, that's in hindsight, and that's a long way out. But if you could kind of do something like that, go from a 5-12 team and be better than where you are now, I feel like that seems like a reasonable thing to do.
Like I would say I'm a Spurs fan. I'm actually more of a Spurs fan than I'm a Cowboys fan because of the culture in which they've set. They were the best dynasty for 20 years. I know Lakers have equal championships. They're more popular, 3-peat, back-to-back. Kobe Bryant, doesn't matter. They were the best because 50 straight wins every season that Tim Duncan was there, except for a year that they were 37-13 won the championship in a lockout year. They expressed all that. Timmy retired. Then Manu retired. Then Tony Parker retired and moved on. And then they were just kind of in a purgatory of like, we got DeMar and DeMarcus, but we're early round exit. We're in the play-in game. And then they have DeJounte Murray, who is an all-star and set triple-double records for the franchise. And they traded him away. Got 3 first-round picks. And then all of a sudden now have the best prospect in years. And yeah, they are 11-44. But I am totally fine with that.
That's
because it's exciting.
Yeah.
On top of having him, you have all the assets.
Right.
And it's just, there's only up from here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can be patient as a fan that won 5 championships that are moving in a positive direction.
Right.
So if Dallas, going back to football, if they want to go all in, and the negative of that is you're going to have a couple of down years.
Right.
I will take that 100 days out of 100 days. So, but I don't think that they see it that way. And that's why I'm not really high on them improving this offseason to, in January, when it really counts, saying, oh, yeah, they're going to be the team to beat.
Yeah.
I can't put myself in that with this current mindset.
Well, Dallas fans are rough on that team, too. You know, that I think that's something, you know, it's one of the most emotional football teams I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have we're going to win it all guys, and then they're heartbroken, and that whole thing just doesn't make sense to me as much. And so, but I know that I believe that ownership feels that presence of that. One other person that I want to mention is Drawn Curse. He will be a free agent this year, and he was not very. He was a below average safety this year, and I think that would be a position that could be improved. But like I was saying earlier, linebacker, running back, center, interior offensive line, safety. What those positions are the least, not least important, but they're not the positions that you pay. They're not the positions that you like want perennial guys at as often. You know, I always talk about you got to have the quarterback, you got to have the left tackle, one wide receiver, an edge rusher, and a guy to stop the receiver. So those aren't any of those positions, and so you have the opportunity to get cheaper first off because those are cheaper positions to pay into, and then also you know you have some other electrifying positions that cover those up a lot better than if you were missing a corner.
Absolutely. So, and kind of just expressing to that, you know, those kinds of positions where going all in, those aren't expensive positions where it's going to just derail everything. Like, hypothetically, say that Dallas wants to be aggressive and go after Saquon Barkley. And, again, it's a rough year to pay Paul later down the line. It's not going to help much. But this year, probably have a $5 million cap hit, despite being one of the higher paid running backs, just because there's nobody else getting paid. And it'll be the early start of contract. Those kinds of moves improve your roster tremendously. And it shows that, like, we're going all in because the difference between Tony Pollard and Saquon Barkley cannot be
it's night and day. Yeah,
night and day. And, you know, everybody can do a serviceable 1-2 punch that can go far. That's true. But if that's one of your only weaknesses and you have room to do stuff, go get a guy. And this free agency class, like I said, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler. I don't want Austin Eckler. But those kinds of guys improve your team. And Tony Pollard is fine. He's okay. I don't want him back because of the fact that he is a running back that has to play this one way. And if not, then he is not as impactful as he should.
He needs a 1A. He needs a Z to take the punishment for 3-yard gains and goal line stuff because he is an explosive guy, but where if you run the ball?
And obviously they're different sizes.
Yeah,
but I would like to compare like the fit to Devon Achane for Miami. He will never be a 20 carry guy.
Yeah.
But having Raheem Mostert from now to get in between the tackle runs, and then eventually they'll move on and get somebody else that's a power back, or at least somebody that can take on that workload. If Zeke would have stayed, Tony Pollard would have looked much better than he did. But because Zeke left and then they didn't replace him, it's like, oh, this scat back that is best outside the tackles, you have to feed him every game. And so even the best matchups, he was not putting up gaudy numbers. And Dallas wasn't necessarily a run-first team, but there have always been a 50-50 balance, especially since Michael McCarthy's been. And he just couldn't fill that role. And so if you tell me you bring him back, but you're going to bring in somebody that can be that guy,
Okay.
More power to you.
Yeah.
And just as an example, Zeke had a hell of a year. He outplayed Tony Pollard this year. And if you brought him back, I guarantee you he's going to be like minimum price.
Yep.
And he would be a lot better of a fit if you're going to bring in a cheap scat back or bring back Tony Pollard to be a 14 touch a game guy.
Yeah.
So
we talk about the Lions. That's the it is the 1A 1B that some teams need.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need that for like certain guys. Like we were talking about Christian McCaffrey's, Saquon's. You don't need two because they do both and they're good at both. They don't get hit as hard because they're very elusive type of players.
Right.
Bijan's going to be that kind of player. So you don't have to have both.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I think that, running back will be addressed, getting a guy, even in the draft, it's cheaper. And you can get a guy like Braylon Allen, we talk about, who's 245, 6'2", 245.
He's 19.
He's currently 19 years old. He will be 20 when the season starts, everybody.
He's the youngest player in this draft, and he is just built like an absolute bowling ball. And he is A.J. Dillon on crack.
Yeah.
That's how I would describe him.
And he plays at running back, one of the best running back schools in the nation.
Yeah. Wisconsin has just been a factory for decades.
Yeah. Melvin Gordon, Jonathan Taylor,
Ron
all of them. So that's definitely going to be something, that could happen. And you could keep Tony Pollard. And he'll be cheaper because he didn't have the year that you were hoping.
Either a prove a deal or just you get discounted because, again, of the depth at the position, there's going to be guys that just don't get the contracts that they have.
Yeah.
So, and obviously, Derrick Henry for the next 2 seasons is more of a priority for teams. Josh Jacobs is in his prime. Saquon Barkley is in his prime. They're both arguably top 5 running backs in the entire league.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tony Pollard coming off a down year, being a scat back that can't be a 20 touch a game guy, isn't really going to command that much of attention, especially, I guess, from a salary perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gives more of an advantage to the team that, he was most recently playing.
Yeah, and why would he want to leave if he doesn't have to?
Exactly.
But yeah, so I think that wraps up the NFC East. We appreciate y'all watching. We hope y'all can like and definitely. I would love to see comments of like, why you disagree or agree with us because we, that's what we're doing up here. We're having a discussion with y'all about and ourselves about, how these teams could or should do in this offseason. And we're not necessarily going to be right. We just, we put our opinions out there so that y'all can critique them and tell us what y'all think. So definitely subscribe, like, and if y'all can comment just something that y'all disagree with or like about what we said.
For sure. And again, it's all about perspective because as much as we, cover and watch as much football as we do, obviously we side with watching more of some teams than others. And, Philly obviously is a great team, but it's not like every single game is just being watched from snap to snap and then we watch it back and watch the highlights and see what went wrong from a grand scheme of things. So show me a Philly fan that is unbiased and tells me what went wrong with them and how you can improve. Giants fans, Commanders fans, all that good stuff. We're open to discussion. That's why that's our brand. So like, subscribe, comment, share, do what you got to do, and I can't wait to see what else we can talk about next.
We will hopefully. We're gonna finish out this whole thing. We're gonna start on positional rankings. We'll talk about the draft, fantasy football coming around. So we'll be here for a long time. So just
we're not going anywhere.
Come along for the ride, and we'll hopefully say some things that happen and that are good for teams, and then maybe teams won't listen to us. I won't go for them. So, but yeah. So thanks for coming and watching, guys. We appreciate it.
See y'all next time.
Bye.